Hello Internet! Can you believe we're just 2 weeks away from Summer Games Fest? Hype is in the air, and I hope you've all got your clown makeup ready just in case FF7 Remake Part 3 doesn't get revealed. But let's dream big! Part 3 is the finale. It's the last chance we get to wistfully speculate about what we hope to see. So, with that being said, here's what I'm hoping to see in Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. Rebirth gave us our first taste of exploring Gaia in full AAA 3D, and Part 3 is the team's chance to really double down on this. Personally, I'm hoping that the checklist-style exploration is gone, and there's more focus on natural discovery. Things like caves and other off-the-beaten-path types areas to explore. Stuff that you can potentially miss because there's no checklist to say that it's there. It's the final game after all. The chains are broken. There is no Part 4 to worry about. Hide optional summoning material somewhere. Hide a completely optional dungeon. Or even tuck some little lore tidbits away. Just give us reasons to explore beyond the checklist. Guess they could go the route of some Assassin's Creed games and have a toggle between a guided and unguided mode. To be honest, I just want to see what the team can do with zones without the constraint of having to think about needing 4 Wave Towers, 5 Lifespring fonts for example. Add areas that can only be reached with a specific Chocobo, or the Highwind. Give us a reason to go back to re-explore areas already visited. Just hide stuff away that rewards people for exploring. And, speaking of a certain airship, so the Highwind is obviously going to be in Part 3. I mean, can you imagine the outrage if it isn't? But I've been thinking about how it might work, and I think we actually really got a pretty good impression with the way the Tiny Bronco worked in Rebirth. When exploring the Meridian Ocean with the Tiny Bronco, the land continents had only lower level assets on them. All the important landmarks and visible features were there, but things like NPCs and enemies wouldn't load in until you docked the Tiny Bronco. That whole process of docking kind of acted as a soft load screen. I expect the Highwind will likely work in a similar way, with each region having a few designated landing areas, or possibly 1 or 2 spots where the team can rappel down with a rope, and the Highwind will remain hovering in the sky above that spot. This could be used to gain access to some areas that were previously inaccessible, or to even expand areas that we went to in Rebirth, such as the grasslands for example. There's a huge chunk of that on the map that we never actually went to. Perhaps there's scope to do even more in the air this time. Now in the original we had to fight with Ultimate Weapon, but I can see there potentially being aerial combat this time, or, I don't know, for example, Shimmer or Rutai and reconnaissance crafts, and if you shoot them down and find where they crash, they can give you intel for side quests or finding rare items or weapons. Perhaps there could even be, another optional super boss that can only be fought in the air. There's so much room to expand the Highwind. So I'm not going to talk too much about locations here, as I feel like we're all expecting places like Rocket Town and Wutai and Medeal and the Great Glacier and hopefully stuff like Goblin Island. But what I do want to say is I think we will see stuff shift around a bit again. Because we're, in Rebirth, Fort Condor was in a slightly different location, the Temple of the Ancients was in a completely different location, and we also had Chocobo Sage in the Nebel region for some reason. So I expect some stuff is going to move around a little bit. I do hope we'll also see the integration of things from Crisis Core and Ever Crisis, maybe going to the ruins of Benora, for example. My big dream would be for the map to have a day and night cycle that could affect stuff like where and which enemies spawn, what shops are open, for example. Maybe there might be a pathway that only opens while the guard goes out on patrol at night. Just lots of fun little things like that. This is firmly in a region of very nice to have and not a complete deal breaker, but I'd love to see it, even if it's just an option in photo mode, to be honest. Now, the other thing I'd really love to see on the map, which is going to reflect my personal bias towards my favourite Zelda game, Majora's Mask, is that once Sephiroth has summoned Meteor, with each passing chapter in the game, Meteor grows bigger and bigger in the sky to really give that feeling of imposing doom. And maybe even, the closer Meteor gets, it could cause wildlife to start going feral, or the gravitational impacts might cause new caves or terrain alterations, just really expanding upon the effect Meteor has on the world. Maybe the closeness of Meteor could even impact the NPC dialogue, for example, or shops might start hiking their prices up or doing flash sales because they feel the end of the world is coming. Just really giving that sense of
impending doom.
Of course, it wouldn't be Final Fantasy VII, especially without Chocobos. Now, this kind of ties back to exploration, really. I really like the Chocobos in Rebirth. Actually, that's a lie. I didn't completely like them. I wasn't a huge fan of having to capture a new one in each zone. Some of those mini games weren't for me, but I appreciate what they were trying to do there. The bigger disappointment with Chocobos in Rebirth for me really was that the different colours were restricted to each individual region. It would have been fun, for example, to, be able to take the blue Chocobo back to the grasslands and hover above a lake to get to something behind a waterfall that would have normally been inaccessible. Maybe with the Highwind having a Chocobo stable on it, this will become possible. At least I hope so. And of course we can't really talk about Chocobos without the legendary Golden Chocobo. I really do hope the Gold Chocobo comes back. I'm still not, fully sure in my head whether they make it optional like in the original, or tied more into the main story. But there's definitely room to expand on the Chocobo system from Rebirth, and I really hope they do. And when it comes to summons, I really, really hope that this time they're not just all tied to poor old Chadley's VR simulator again. Put some out in the world. If I remember the time of finding the Hades material in the Sunken Gelnica in the original. I know I sound like I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but reward exploration. Hiding powerful summons is like, the perfect prize for this. I also hope that summons are made more impactful as well. I used them on and off in Remake, but in Rebirth I never really felt the need to use them. Don't get me wrong, they looked visually cool, but functionally they didn't feel very impactful. If I were to dream, what I'd like to see is something like Final Fantasy XII's Gambit system, where you could set behaviours for the summons, and then when you summon them they act in line with those behaviours. Perhaps even expanding the system further, it could be tied into the synergy system. So if you have synergy pips available, you could combo with the summons. So, as an example, Mamu and Barrick could combo together to send out a bunch of lightning orbs. Ifrit could empower Cloud's next attack to deal additional fire damage. Shiva could cause Tifa's abilities to temporarily slow the attack speed of enemies, for example. Or even just, fun wombo combos like we saw with the synergies between party members in Rebirth. It just feels like a really good way of expanding the synergy system further, and also incorporating summons a bit more into the battle system. And well, we can't really be on the topic of summons without thinking about So Knights of the Round is the thing we're all wondering how they're going to do it. I keep going back and forth in my mind on whether they're going to integrate it into the main story or not, or if it's just going to remain something optional they can only find with the Gold Chocobo. Personally, I'm kind of leaning towards a mixture of the two, actually. Now, one of the popular theories is that Knights of the Round is going to be the Cetra's ultimate materia, which is what they used to originally defeat Genova. However, there's something else I've been considering. In the Temple of the Ancients, we learned that humankind and the Cetra were at war at one point in history. Now we know that the Gi learned how to harness the live stream and create their own materia through thought and bits of prayer. So what if humanity actually learned how to harness that power as well? And Knights of the Round is actually humanity's greatest warriors that fought against the Cetra. And much like the Black Materia, the Cetra deemed the Knights of the Round Materia to be so dangerous that they had to hide it away somewhere, namely the really inaccessible cave off in the middle of nowhere in the top of the corner of the world. It's an even crazier thought. What if it was actually Genova who helped humanity forge that materia? Either way, I think we're definitely going to see a lot more lore and expansion on Knights of the Round. It's something players have been speculating since the OG about how it really actually integrates into the mythos of the Final Fantasy VII world. And this is the perfect opportunity to expand further on it. As to how we go about acquiring it, I think this could actually be a really cool side quest chain where we have to go and fight the individual warriors around the world to gain their blessing. Once we've attained all those blessings, that's what grants us the knowledge to know where the materia is actually hidden. As for how it's going to function in combat, that is the very big question. Now I guess if the summons continue to work how they currently do, each knight might just be its own thing in the summons ATB list. Once the summoning time is elapsed, that's when they do the big ultimate. All of them appear for the 20-minute long cutscene that deals massive damage. We'll just have to see how that one goes. But personally, I think it might actually be a bit more interactive this time. We might still get the super long cutscene, but I can see it having something similar to the QuickTime events seen in Loveless and the June on Parade, or even if you think about other games, Clair Obscure for example, where if you do the button presses at the perfect time, it deals more damage. And it'll certainly make it a bit more interactive than just sitting through a super lengthy cutscene and putting the controller down and going and making a cup of tea. So on the combat front, I think we're all expecting to see triple tech abilities. It feels like the natural progression of the synergy system to make it include all 3 party members for some truly ultimate wombo combos. And on the topic of party members, I think it'd be really cool to be able to actively switch between the entire party while in combat. That could probably present some balance problems with encounter design, but at the same time, Yuffie was completely busted in Rebirth and they never fixed her, so I feel like they're okay with players finding ingenious or completely busted ways to do massive damage. So a Final Fantasy X style system where we can swap out party members in combat would be really cool. Another way they could expand the combat system further would be to go for a builders and detonators type thing to expand or sit alongside the stagger mechanic. So for example, Tifa could inflict a bunch of weaknesses onto an enemy. If Barret uses a big shot on that enemy, it detonates those debuffs and deals extra damage. Or, if you use an ice ability on an enemy, it makes them more vulnerable to a fire ability. If an enemy was already weak to fire to begin with, having that extra weakness on top will deal double damage. This could add further strategy to the battle system, and I expect while it wouldn't impact regular encounters too much, there could be fun opportunities with super bosses of, think back to Hell House and having to cycle through weaknesses. This could be a good way of adding some additional strategy into those encounters. And plus, just seeing bigger numbers is always more fun. Kind of the more obvious expansion is that there's still some level 4 limit breaks we haven't seen yet, so I expect those are going to pop up. And maybe, who knows, we might see even more new to re-trilogy limit breaks. Maybe there could be synergy limit breaks, for example. I don't know. That could be a cool way of expanding it further. That might be too wishful though. Now, as Part 3 is the final part of the trilogy, there'd be a good opportunity to add in some much needed quality of life, making stuff like materia loadouts, for example, so you can quickly toggle between loadouts on characters with materia setups you want to switch back and forth between, or maybe even just an auto-equip recommended materia to people who just really don't want to faff around with menuing. You could also see some cool stuff like transmogrification, so once you've unlocked a weapon, you can use that weapon's appearance going forward. So, if you want Cloud's ultimate weapon to look like a Buster Sword without affecting the stats, that's completely doable. Maybe that'll be a New Game Plus thing, but, let's change the appearance of the weapons. It's the final part of the trilogy. We've seen nearly every weapon model now, so let us use them. Another thing I'd really like to see is a cutscene viewer. I keep thinking back to the Sphere viewer from Final Fantasy X and rewatching all those glorious FMVs. So, once we've completed the game, give us a menu where we can just watch cutscenes without needing to play through to get to them. And of course, it's not really quality of life, but it's still something fun, and that's costumes. We had it in Rebirth where we could use the beach rail all the time and the Loveless outfits once we've completed the game. So continue with this in Part 3. Once we've finished the game, I don't know, give us Advent Children costumes or OG costumes. Bring the beach rail back. Just give us, ways to make that next playthrough more fun. Now, my purely selfish wish is that I really hope that they expand photo mode. The photo mode in Remake, Integrate, and Rebirth is okay. It's not amazing. It's not as good as some games. Admittedly, it's better than some other games. But, as somebody plays FF14 occasionally and seeing how in-depth the photo mode in that game is, I'd really love to see the photo mode in Part 3 expanded upon. So I'm not going to do too much in the way of story speculation in this video, but one thing I have been thinking about is how both Remake and Rebirth were fairly faithful up until the final act. What I think might happen in Part 3 is that the divergence point will come a lot earlier in the game, so we'll have our big, 40 hours of open exploration, but then the final third of the game will be a lot more condensed and focused. And I expect that's where we'll see some divergence from the OG. At least that's what I hope they do. A lot of us, I guess, are kind of hoping that maybe we might get a playable Advent Children segment, for example. So if I was to speculate, I imagine story-wise it's still going to be fairly faithful, but just expanded upon. I really hope they bring in a lot of the lore they've created for Ever Crisis, as it really fleshes out places like Wutai, the Masamune's background, more Sephiroth's motivations. But I think as a whole, that whole chunk of the game will remain fairly faithful, but then our point of divergence is anyone's guess, really. And I do kind of hope they do diverge a bit and expand more. As much as I love the story of the OG, I kind of like these what-if scenarios they've been setting up in both Remake and Rebirth. And if they don't expand upon that in Part 3, part of me will be a little disappointed, to be honest. So we'll have to wait and see, really. I must admit that at the end of Remake, I was probably one of the few people who was immediately on board with the whole potentially we might be changing Destiny thing. Was strapped in and ready for whatever wild ride we were going to be taken on. And then I'd say Rebirth is probably actually a lot more faithful to the OG story, apart from Chapter 14. So we'll have to see where this all goes. I really do hope they stick the landing with it, though. It'll be a shame if they fumbled the landing after so many years of speculating over what if and what could be. So, fingers crossed, they stick the landing. But either way, I'm here to go on whatever ride and story they want to tell us. So there you have it. Those are some of my hopes for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. What did you think? Is there anything you're looking forward and hoping will be added? Is there anything you hope they don't do? Obviously, let me know down in the comments. And I'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye!